Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's London Co-working Assembly webinar. We're going to be discussing all things rural co-working, a very exciting topic. I am your host for this morning, Tash Thomas, and I'm joined by my co-host, Naima. If you want to give everyone...
Oh, hello, good morning. I'm Naima Almaster-Milsom, and welcome.
And we are joined with some awesome panelists who are, experts when it comes to rural co-working. So we'll go around and give you an introduction from each of those. We'll start off with Jo.
Yeah, hi, I'm super happy to be here. My name is Johanna Voll, or Jo. So I'm the co-founder of the Co-working Library and also on the board of the European Co-working Assembly and the German Co-working Federation. I have my own little co-working project in my hometown Halle, and I'm excited to be here.
Amazing. That's everything co-working, all the co-workings. And next up we have Rich.
Hi, I'm Rich Mills. I'm the co-founder of a UK-based workspace business called Hatchery. We redevelop and operate rural workspaces, so typically redeveloping old farm buildings and agricultural sites. I also am part of a few other groups, so the UK and European co-working assemblies, working in partnership with a group that researches rural workspaces based up in Newcastle, and then a couple of groups in the southeast around the creative economy and Kent co-working spaces where First Sight is.
Amazing, thank you, Rich. And finally, we have Jose.
Hi, thank you for having me here. My name is Jose Morales. I live in Slovenia. I'm the founder of Aurora Coworking, also a cooperative called Aurora Coworking Network here in Slovenia. And I'm a team member in the European Rural Coworking project.
Amazing. So I wasn't lying. I said we had an awesome panel lined up for you. So in case you are new to the webinars that we run, the way we kind of like to do it is that we make it as fully interactive as possible. So it's going to be led by you, our audience. So we're going to give you a few moments now to generate any questions based on now understanding who we have in the room. Any questions that sort of come to mind, whether that's you need advice on something, help on something, you have a query in terms of what the landscape looks like, drop them into the comments. And myself and Naima will be keeping an eye on the comments for those questions during the session. So I'd like to give you kind of a couple of moments to think about it. Also, in the meantime, I guess I'm going to come with a question for our panelists to begin with. For those, I know that a lot of people here will kind of say, well, that's a silly question, but I know that people have a lot of different definitions when it comes to rural co-working. So for each of you, would you like to give your definition of what rural co-working means to you? I don't mind who goes first. Whoever feels like they want to take the gauntlet, go for it.
I'll go if you like. Mine's probably quite basic. So I guess there's two parts to rural co-working. So the rural bit, we look at that in quite a broad way. So anything that's not in a major town or city. So that could be a smaller village, smaller provincial town, or could be more remote than that. So out in the sticks by the seaside, but quite a broad range there. Particularly people who don't live in as densely populated areas as those that live in cities. And then in the co-working side, again, quite a broad definition, but we tend to look at it more as a workspace, more generally, or flexible workspace. So not necessarily just co-working in the sense of sitting shoulder to shoulder with another member, but also looking at different types of workspace and environments that can be used flexibly. So moving away from the landlord-tenant model with 5-year leases and looking more like a membership or subscription model with more of a community focus to it.
I'm living for that answer. Jo or Jose, do you have anything to add? What would be your definition?
Yes, sure. Well, probably it depends on who you ask. And I've actually compiled a few definitions so far. So in terms of rural and peripheral areas, it's usually all the places that are up to small and medium-sized towns. For the European Co-working Assembly project, we use also the inhabitants. So anything under 50,000 inhabitants is considered rural. Then again, others have a little bit more broader definitions, probably, like Rich explained, anything beyond big cities. So, for example, for Germany, that would mean anything that is less than 100,000 inhabitants. Then again, the European Union has their own standards, which are called geocode standard, NUTS, and they use that for their data collection, which basically results in 83% of all of the EU being rural. So that's quite interesting in terms of numbers, that Europe, is quite rural indeed.
Thank you. As you can tell, Jo's definitely on the research and data side of things. And she's also head of a project, our co-working library as well. So she's definitely the person to come to for the facts and figures of things, for sure. Jose, did you want to add?
Yes. So I've seen that rural co-working spaces have a different personality. They are not necessarily looking for providing services to their members, but they are very much focused, in my opinion, to community building. And they are starting to become kind of an embassy of community building in the different regions and towns. So the problem of the word rural is that it sounds like farming, right, to many of us. But for those, I'm Peruvian, and when I'm coming to Europe, I see that the rural areas look like cities, right? Therefore, it is very much suburban co-working, what I would say from my point of view.
It's a really interesting perspective as well, like the idea that if we have rural co-working, does that mean we also have urban co-working by its very opposite definition, right? And exactly that, the idea of depending on where you're pulling that definition from. So I have my understanding of what rural looks like being somebody from the UK with giant cities like Manchester and London. Therefore, it makes anything kind of outside of that immediately feel rural, but actually in a lot of spaces, even those smaller cities would be great cities depending on where you're coming from. I see we do have some comments coming in, so I'm going to hand over to Naima for the
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that definition. And we have, we have a few minutes for people to start putting some questions. We need more, please, here. So our first question is from Peter Evans, and it's, how do we overcome the issue of connectivity? Typically, rural areas are poorly served with broadband infrastructure. Who went to, I'll leave it to the floor. I don't, who went to answer that?
Did we lose her?
I can go again first.
Yeah,
if the others want to take the lead. I guess I can speak mainly from experience. So connectivity is definitely a challenge. Speaking about the UK primarily, where that sort of urban-rural divide, digital connectivity is a really important thing there. Knock-on impacts of that, not just being able to access the internet, but things like tech education, and there's definitely an imbalance between living in an urban area versus rural at the moment. We had to be quite proactive in sort of managing the challenge of connectivity. And in the UK, if you get a new broadband installation, it's usually done by Openreach. Peter, you may know this, but you can form community fibre partnerships. So if you have enough properties that can be residential or commercial, and you group them together as a community, you can then apply to have government funding support to get the install done. So if you were to approach that yourself just with one site or one building, you may find that the bill was £50,000 just to get your property connected. But if you partner with 20 or so neighbours, and they don't have to be immediately next door, they could be rural next door, so a mile down the road. But if you partner together, it makes it potentially much more affordable, or you could get it for free if you had enough vouchers to cover it.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. I mean, also there was some sort of government funding for various initiatives. Any more comments from other panelists?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, this also really relates to one of the biggest challenges of rural co-working, that the concept is still fairly new and we need to talk about it more, connect to other networks, to make a case for better connectivity, and to really talk about it and connect to the local authorities who might handle that. I think we have a different or quite similar system here in Germany. You need to apply to have broadband internet or fast speed internet. So it's crucial to get the word out there.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I mean, is it something that we can think about, maybe the rural co-working or workspace in general getting together? And could be a the broadband infrastructure could be something that they can team up together to talk to their local authorities and move this forward. Any more comments, Jose?
Yes, I would love to comment on that. So actually, the reason why we started the Aurora Coworking Network here in Slovenia is precisely to join forces with micro coworking spaces that exist around the country. And the reason is because as units, we do not leverage any kind of power. Those are coworking spaces with 5, 10 members. So as soon as you go to the municipality and they ask you and how many members you have, and you say 5 or 10, then basically they stop listening. So a way of leveraging power is by connecting each other. And that's how we see it. And now the other thing I wanted to comment about Slovenia and connectivity is that, as far as I know, we do not experience problems with connectivity to the internet. So basically, everywhere we get access to internet via your mobile phone or wireless devices. It is true that there are some places with poorer connection than others, but basically I see that rural municipalities or municipalities in rural areas are very concerned on providing good connection.
Oh, that's really good to hear. And anyone from other part of Europe that can share their experience with us in terms of the connectivity? With us in the audience, or just about the UK? Nope, didn't get any. Yes, I think it's definitely there is something to learn from Slovenia and how they've done it. And looking at this today is more about, as you said, it's more about the members, how many people get together. This could be something that we could be looking at going forward after this event today, is how we try and get people to work as a group to make sure that they move the broadband forward. Any other comments, any other questions on this?
No, I think we're good. I'm aware that we don't have any more questions coming in, so please do feel free to add them. However, I do have a question for you. I'm aware that it's a question that comes up actually when we've hosted these webinars, and we're not necessarily specifically talking about rural co-working, but we're talking about co-working in general, right? And there's a question that constantly comes up of the sustainability, and how do you ensure that your model is sustainable? And, you know, when you're trying to offer affordable memberships and create spaces for community, and that's within cities, that's a challenge. So my question to you is, when we're looking at rural co-working, as Jose just said about the idea of having 5 to 10 members, how does that model shift and change, and how do you make that model work in rural areas?
Well, yes, that's a fantastic question. So, to be honest, the first years of co-working for me, so when I started my co-working space, I was suffering a lot. We didn't have the money to hire people. Therefore, I was the one cleaning, taking care of the space, opening the space, closing the space, etc. But I was very tired of that situation. When the summer came, the members went on holidays, and I had to pay all the normal expenses, and that was a mess. So we decided to change the system and to commit a bit more. So the idea that is still working and is, in my opinion, amazing, started when I decided that co-working is not a business. Okay, so that means I'm not going to get tons of money through co-working. Therefore, the decision was to share the expenses of every month among the members. And we made a compromise of avoiding going over 50 euros per month. Okay, so it's super cheap, right? So the amazing thing is that we doubled the number of members since we started with that decision. And we went twice over the 50 euros now in the times of Corona. But so far, the community has proven to be much more solid than I ever imagined. So sustainability is about, in my opinion, about keeping your space running. And it's not going to run if your community is not solid enough. So if the community doesn't have a sense of ownership, it's going to be very hard, because then you will have to be convincing them why to stay. Right? But in this case, actually, the members of the co-working participate in finding more members in order for all of us to pay less. And that's also an interesting thing. I'm also a member, so I also pay. And, before the Corona times, the team decided to include an additional monthly fee so that I could start receiving a return on my investment in the co-working space. But I was also paying me, right? So everything is 100% equal. And that's how the idea of working as a cooperative was really interesting to us. So we are still working on that.
Thank you. I mean, I think it really just encapsulates the sense of community, which was the whole purpose, right, of the center of what we've always wanted co-working to be, and how we think it should look, what we think it should look like. And that idea of, having ownership, I think that's a really powerful process to put behind, is actually giving members. I mean, you can barely really say members in the same way, right? It's giving the community as a whole that ownership over this project. Joe or Rich, do you have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, totally. I mean, personally, I love the cooperative model, but it's not necessarily the one solution for every rural co-working space. I think the key really is that the business model here has to be different, and it needs to be adapted to the local needs. So you really need to make do your research before you open, and see what's missing in your community. Where can the co-working space also step in and provide a service? And that could be as easy as being the local pickup station for your packages that you get sent, or partnering up with the local library services. Or we also see, for example, a few banks that have added a co-working space. So to really look for what's needed exactly here in this region or in the small town.
Yeah, really important. The idea of making sure that you taking into consideration what your community needs, and that will help you kind of figure it out, and also help you hopefully be profitable at some point. Rich, do you have anything else to add?
I suppose an interesting point to add on that, looking at rural specifically, is if you're setting up a co-working space in a more urban area, there's a larger mass of people there. So if you wanted to go down a certain niche route and, I don't know, fashion design space, you'd probably find enough fashion designers living in London that you could create that co-working space for them. But in a more rural area where there's not so many fashion designers, or other sectors aren't so prevalent, it is very important to understand who you have living around you or likely to use your space. So as Joe's saying, you're really researching and understanding who your customers are, and designing, curating something that they want and need. You can't really have the view of build it and they will come, because there's not enough people to probably succeed in that way.
Yeah, great point. I just feel like actually the tips that you've kind of shared already today, feel like it's something, the idea of setting up a co-working space in a rural area where there is a much smaller population could probably feel quite intimidating. So you can almost sort of talk yourself out of it. Well, who's really going to come? Is there really enough people to use my space? But actually, if you've done that research and you've understood and you have an understanding of your community, actually, it almost seems like a no-brainer at that point. So thank you very much for those shares. I'm going to hand back over to Naima, as I see we do have some comments.
Yes, we do. Yes. Okay. We got from Gary Busworth. If we see a shift to rural co-working being for employees and not just freelancers and entrepreneurs, how does this benefit the local community and other local businesses?
That's a really cool question, and I think we're going to see a lot more research in the future measuring the impact of co-working spaces on the local community. Nevertheless, I also see a few problems here, as there are different regulations in terms of laws for employees working in co-working spaces. So I think those still need to be figured out, because it's very different when an employee works in a co-working space versus a freelancer who's only responsible for themselves in that sense. So I think there is some homework that needs to be done also on the side of the co-working space operators here. But I mean, definitely through partnerships with local businesses and, to have inviting benefits and services where you can partner with the businesses around you, that could also drive people into the space and make it more well known. And maybe just to jump back on the previous question a little bit, you don't want your co-working space to be like a spaceship, because we have lots of people coming back to rural areas where they originally came from. And it's super important to really connect to the local population in that sense, or to have somebody in your team that has that connection. Because I personally know a few spaces that have this startup-y vibe, and they just don't really connect to the businesses and people that are super close around you in the space. And one solution could really be to offer a special, how's it called? Like where they pay less money when you're a local resident to use the space. There could be something that would be interesting, depending on the type of space that you are, of course.
Yeah, and I think we definitely can draw from here how you need to really sort of connect with your local businesses. This is, if we go back to that, think about, the laws and the rules is different for freelancers and self-employed than they are for all people who run their own business than they are for employees. Then that connection from an operator point of view, connecting to employees and to the employers, and sort of discussing and coming up with something that can really work for everyone would be quite, it's an interesting point. Anything to add from?
I would like to add something.
Yeah.
I think that the most important thing to consider is culture. So who is in charge of keeping the culture in the co-working space? Because normally employees are coming with the culture of their companies or of their businesses, and that can disrupt the way the community is developing itself inside of the co-working space. So, but I think it would be fantastic to receive some employees coming to my co-working space in this little town, so that they see what's the difference between working in their normal space and working in a space like ours. I think that, as I said at the beginning, the co-working is an opportunity, and it's an opportunity for community building. It's not an opportunity for finding a job or for working. You can work at home. It is basically to connect with other people, in my opinion. And the problem that I've seen many co-working solve is loneliness. I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but the thing is, it's true. One of the co-working members that we have here in this town enjoys more going for lunch together with the other co-working spaces and going to the co-working space to work. right? So we are finding reasons to connect with more people. So employees that come to a co-working space where normally startup or freelancers interact, that would be a fantastic and super enriching possibility.
Totally agree. And I think Bernie could come here and talk to us about all the coffees that he used to go and get every morning. This is before the COVID. Yes, Rich, you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I guess sort of with the sort of that description that Jose's provided about wanting to ensure you don't end up with a them and us, and you curate that community properly. I think if that's done well, then potentially there's some real benefits there from having maybe the professional workers who usually go into the city and the more startup entrepreneurial people who typically base themselves closer to home. I think that cross-pollination of ideas between those two groups can sometimes be really valuable. So the daily experience as a startup founder is quite different to a senior professional traveling into the city. And I used to be involved in running a community in London that the whole point of it was to try and increase connections between those different groups of people. So I can see that could have some real benefits as long as it's curated in an appropriate way. And thinking about you don't have the sort of two sides to your community space. And I think the other point that Gary sort of asked about around the wider local community, I'm not sure I've seen any research yet on it, but surely there has to be some real benefits to the wider community. Some areas around the edge of London, for example, you may have had 40% of the working age population commuting into London every day. And they're some of the highly skilled, better paid members of that community. So if they're going to spend even 2 or 3 days a week closer to home, that's more money being spent locally. It's knowledge being retained in the local area. And with that collaboration with startups, perhaps knowledge being passed on. So I don't know any statistics for it, but I could see that there's some real benefits to the people, but also obviously environmental benefits of not having so many people traveling and so on.
It is quite absolutely very, very, very valid point there, especially now that, and I mean, in the UK, we all people are going back to work. Employers are, I do some work for Brunel, and even the social distancing is not implemented anymore. So people are working from home and working from an office. What is the providers and co-working are doing to make sure that they linked to those employees, local employees that actually can come and use their space when they're not going to their office? Well, now it's become a very flexible working environment. They don't have to go to an office 5 days a week. So if they go 2 days a week, the 3 other days they can be in their local community co-working space. So is there anybody to add on that? Is the talk started? Are people taking on those co-working? I just would like to hear your views on that.
I was actually going to jump in and just kind of on the previous question as well, and say that I also think now, Jose, when you're talking about that cultural difference between an employee versus a freelancer, and I think now, due to the past 18 months, even that employee culture is different. So, for instance, I was delivering yesterday diversity and inclusion training for Walt Disney, right? And in that training, you have 4 people who have started with the company within the past 2 weeks, and they're working from home. They don't actually know, they understand a certain amount of culture in terms of, the emails they're being sent and the onboarding they're going through. But in terms of that physically in-office culture, they don't even know what that looks like, right? So I think that we now have this space where a lot of employees that are generally coming from bigger organizations potentially actually at the time where they would sort of fit that fit between freelancer, independent working versus employee organization, that is at its most like gellable point, I think, now, where we've had so many people working from home and they're having to kind of develop their own working culture under the umbrella of an organization, but definitely on their own terms. So yeah, the idea that, what Naeem was saying, have you seen anything, all 3 of you, where there's been this kind of tangible connection between organizations reaching out to rural co-working spaces specifically versus the big city co-working spaces?
I believe there is still a lot of visual thinking involved here. And I mean, when we realized how the working patterns are being changed through the pandemic, a lot of us thought, man, I mean, the co-working spaces are the ideal solution against this home office isolation, just as Jose has explained before. But I think the reality is still a little bit behind. I mean, correct me if I'm not right on this one, but I believe that echoing Jose here, the co-working spaces that have built a really strong community before the pandemic also came through it quite well. We're actually quite surprised that not more spaces have gone out of business. Of course, there are a lot who have, but if you've built your community in a right way, but from what I see in reality now is still not a big increase in new members. Just generally speaking. But how is it? Rich, how is it in your space, or the spaces you know?
So Tash, just to confirm, it's so talking about larger employers encouraging their staff maybe to work from co-working.
Yeah.
I think there's I've heard some good examples of it, particularly co-working spaces that are further away from the city. So people that used to commute 2 hours a day each way, now finding places closer to home, and their employers actually contributing something towards the cost of that. I think at the moment there's still a lot of people still working from home, and so there's a challenge for the co-working operators, not just to convince people to not commute into the city anymore, but to convince them to leave their house. So like Jose was saying, what are you actually getting from this space that you can't get from home? So is that community that you're looking for just a change of scenery? And trying to deliver that, but also to explain it properly to people so that they understand why should I go to this different space, and then why should I try and convince my employer to help pay for it? I think so that's looking at directly selling to the employee. For the employer, I think it's a bit more challenging at the moment because we're hopefully going to be one, but there's nobody at the moment operating at scale in rural areas. So if you think about those larger employers, every time that they sign up a new supplier, they've got to go through the full process, compliance, purchasing, real estate strategy. So doing that once for every rural co-working operator is probably an admin burden that they don't want. But if there was a collection of spaces that would all be signed up to in one go, so I mean, there's lots of aggregation websites now, aren't there, for desks and spaces and so on. I could see that being almost the funnel into more rural spaces, whilst the individual operators don't have quite that strength or coverage to provide everything that an individual employer would need at this point.
Really interesting point, that idea of got to do some of the work for them in ways to make it more attractive, but I understand the challenge of that. Thank you, Rich. I'm aware the chat's been popping off left, right and centre next to me.
A quick
go for it, Jo.
A quick sentence to that, because what I see now here, at least for Germany, I know a few examples, and maybe also in other European cities, it's called satellite rings around bigger cities, where you try to get the commuters that would usually go into the city every day. Maybe they only go there, once per week to the main office, and then during the rest of the week they can stay where they live, actually. Also in terms of the 15-minute city that has been discussed here before. So that's something quite interesting, these satellite rings, where it's a network of the co-working spaces around a bigger city, and they have special offerings for employees. And right now they are also doing the first models with government employees, so that they can actually use those spaces basically for them for free, but obviously the government pays for it. But that's a model that has been rolled out here, and it's trying to to develop a little bit more. So that could be something super interesting in the future.
I think that's really maybe an idea for us to start talking about to our local authorities and get our local authorities to encourage their employees to use the rural workspaces and stuff. So that great idea there. Thanks very much. We just thank you for all the information you've put in the chat. Please do check out those links and information that put from Joanna there. I'm just going through here. Jose, before we move on to the next point, do you have anything to add?
So a couple of words passed through my mind while listening. One of them is visionary. I think that the whole rural co-working movement is in the face of vision, right? So we are the persons that are starting the movement. The audience is proving that there is an interest and there's a question mark, and that needs to be answered. And I'm sure that this is the right time to get into rural co-working and find out what is going to be and create what is going to be. And the other word is social impact. So when you get in the world of social impact, one of the things that comes first is how are you going to measure your social impact? And I think that rural co-working should start including the idea and the concept of measuring impact. And what could be better if we all agree which metrics are we going to use, right? So that we get some kind of a standard numbers that could help us leverage more influence and power.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. Okay, we're going to move on to the next. There's a question from Neil Pepper. How do you manage noise calls in space? Some people are on calls all day for job. Others might have odd call, but generally just focus on work. Lots of people on calls can be distracting, and if many people are on calls, it just sounds like a call center. Do you have call boxes? Rules on how calls, headphones and mics, etc.
You know what happens in my co-working space? Someone stands up and said, please shut up. And that's it. So actually, we know when someone is going to make a call, everybody knows and everybody gets ready. So the person goes to a special place, everybody behaves. We know we cannot be making a lot of noise, etc., etc. I think more than a commercial aspect here, it is about setting up the.
Yes, setting up the culture. Also, rules. I think any of you is going to be using the co-working space. Do they sign some rules when they start? I don't know. I mean, anybody else comment on that?
I think it totally depends. If you're a small co-working community, the rules don't necessarily have to be written. They can be rather implicit and enforced, like Jose just explained. But of course, with bigger communities, you do need designated areas for calls, webinars, teaching online, stuff like that. Some people are just talking to a camera all day, right? And you don't want to sit next to them. Or actually, when you're the one doing the talking, you don't want all the background noises around you as well. So what I've seen is, either people investing in new phone booths or converting meeting rooms that are not in use anymore to areas for calls. Also, lots of really cool DIY projects where people use the time that the space hasn't been as occupied as before to convert little tiny garden houses into booths for calling. Don't forget the the air exchange system, though. That's one important factor because it can be really hot in those little sheds. Lots of really interesting projects from super expensive ones that you can buy, obviously, to the DIY solution you do over the weekend with your friends.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Rich, anything to add to that?
I don't think
No.
so.
Okay.
No.
Right. So I think, definitely don't want to turn your workspace into a call center. It's when you're totally struggling to will just meet the expenses of the co-working space and having to buy extra sort of space, boots and stuff to put it in. So it can be really, really very costly. And I think for us, I run a small space. It's just having to set up those rules at the beginning, and then just people have to stick to the rules so we don't turn it into that call center. I'll move into the next question from Peter Evans. I would like to ask about inward investment. If somebody is looking to create or reimagine a farm building or build from scratch, is the investor community invested in rural workspaces?
Shall I start, given this is what we sort of do? I suppose it's like any investment really. If the numbers stack up, then there'll probably be interest in it. But that's quite a challenging thing to do in the UK and in rural areas, because the market's not really established yet. At least the flexible model, it can be quite difficult to prove the proposed valuation of a development because there's no sort of historic comparables to reference against to say how much something will be worth. Plus, there might not be a market in your local area to know exactly how you can price your space. So there are challenges due to the fact that it's a sort of a growing, relatively young market compared to cities. But I think there's a lot of opportunities out there to do interesting projects. Particularly if you can find public support, whether funding support in particular, to try and help on the financial side, I certainly think there's interest in the concept. I think there's the demand there. It's just trying to make the financials work in a way where an investor will be compelled to invest in that versus what else they could be looking at. So that's a challenge that we're working through, particularly at the moment. The UK construction market's a real challenge because of Brexit, the pandemic, lack of delivery drivers. All contractors have got a backlog of projects, so all the good ones are really busy. So there's loads of challenges at the moment, but that's not to say that the opportunities aren't out there. It's just a case of picking the right sites and structuring them in the right way.
I cannot really add any insights with regards to investments, but I know for sure that there are a lot of funding opportunities out there. There are the European-wide ones, but then also local, national ones. They may not always be labeled how to found a co-working space in rural areas, but you sort of sometimes have to think a little bit outside the box. Anything social impact, social entrepreneurship, third spaces. Sometimes there are funding schemes for that that you can jump on, but it's very diverse to figure out. I always call it the funding jungle because it's not easy to find the way to the funds and then start the application process. And then especially also, I mean, you probably need one person for all the bookkeeping and stuff, especially when you're dealing with EU-funded projects, which leads to another challenges that co-working spaces in rural areas do face. Many of them start with public funding, but it's quite hard when you've started out with that to really develop a sustainable business model that sustainable for the space after the initial phase of the funding, which is usually a year or two. But then after that, you're on your own. And unfortunately, many of those initiatives slowly vanish after that initial public funding phase.
It's something that we've been through, experienced firsthand, the funding process. I think that's a good description, that sort of jungle. It's really hard to find things sometimes, but once you do find them, you actually find that the public sector, the people you're speaking to, are actually quite supportive, very helpful. It's just trying to find the funding initiative that's relevant to your project. And then obviously the admin process of working through application forms and so on is a bit of a challenge. But if it makes your project happen, or if it helps you to de-risk it or make it more successful, then it's a reasonable thing to invest some time in. it is just a case of trying to find them. The UK at the moment, again, it's a bit of a challenging place because they're sort of transitioning European funding to what will the UK government replace it with. So right at this point in time, it's a bit difficult, but I'm sure that in the next couple of years, there'll be some new funding schemes, initiatives that will be available for rural developers or communities wanting to create workspaces.
Thank you. Any more to add into this? There's quite a lot of comments, a lot of links and information that been put in the chat. Please take a note. Would we share these, Bernie, with the audience? I think yeah.
We can share whatever. It's all about sharing, Naima.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic.
It's collaboration over competition.
Yeah. So if anybody, sort of, because there's quite a lot of very, very useful links there and information that I think it's pretty, I would really like to have it, so I can't take a note at the moment. Anyway, any more comments on what's been discussed so far?
I think I would add that it's super important to reach out to your local municipality, or if you have something like the local economic development agencies that might be also familiar with the funding schemes. And that actually, from my experience, is really, you can be lucky. And there are people who have already understood the concept of co-working and are a little bit more innovative and creatively thinking, also in terms of really giving room for this innovation and thinking outside of their usual things they deal with every day. So that is definitely an approach that I would suggest to take.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Something I would like to add is that funding is essential, but it's not a prerequisite for starting the project. Right, so I've seen many initiatives that die before they really begin because they start by looking for money and then they cannot find it and then they stop. But what I've seen happening as a success case is initiatives that start building the community first. And once they have a community, they have an additional argument to get the funding. So do not let the idea of funding or business models or how are you going to get the money back stop you, and just begin. Here you have people ready to support you. If any of you have the idea or the ambition of creating a small co-working space, it is possible. I'm completely sure that in the town where you live or in the city where you live, you see a lot of empty spaces. Those empty spaces are sometimes owned by big companies. Find out who they are, and as we did, we are using a space that is from a bank, and they offered us a free rent in exchange for keeping the space fine. And we pay the expenses, the electricity, the heating, and all these kind of things, maintain the space, and it's a win-win situation, right? So ask yourself, what for do you need the funding? But don't let an idea stop you, right? Just go for building your co-working space or joining one.
Absolutely valid, and also just creating that track record and people know who you are, and that will attract that investment, will attract those funding, will attract those people, and even your local authority wanted to come and talk to you because got something that they they wanted to support. Sometimes when you don't have anything to show for, it can be really, really hard to break into those grants and investment and money. So definitely agree with Jose. Just go for it. Find a space, set up your community or the co-working space. Okay, any more? Do we have any more questions here? Okay, I think we've finished the question. We still have 11 minutes. Anything to add from our panelists?
Yes, I would love to stress the value of networks in rural co-working, and we see a lot of them in the making. That could be on the national level or just on the regional level or even just in a really small area, but really get together with other co-working space operators. And I think Jose has a good story to tell from Slovenia where he did exactly that. And also, maybe a little bit more about the European rural co-working project that would be probably super helpful here.
Thank you. Yes, no, definitely. I think we have someone here in the comments said they would really, if something starts, they would love to join us. I'm just going back trying to find it. If you look in, if you're looking to forward a lobby group to build awareness and overcome barriers to entry, I would be keen to participate. This is from Peter Evans. So it's this is networking is definitely a hopefully today can be a start of something. Anything, I think, Rich, or were you just about to say something?
Nothing specific. I was just reading the questions.
Okay. Right.
Top challenges for 2022. So I think there's that challenge of now that once humans are given something, we get used to having it and we don't like having it taken away. So everyone's just been told they can work from home and not bother showering or getting commuting in the morning. So how do we convince them that co-working spaces are not just better than the commute into the city, but also better than working from home? And that will vary depending on the operator. It might be a smaller space that is just a change of scenery and some friendly faces, or it might be a larger operator that offers health and well-being programs and educational courses. But I think there's got to be a reason there to really sell rural co-working and what are the benefits. So I think on that sort of marketing side is probably one of them. And then in the UK at the moment, the obvious thing is around inflation, supply chain, construction costs, and just being able to deliver a quality space, a quality service that stacks up for you financially. So I think that's an obvious challenge at the minute for the market. I know that's only two, but I'm only one.
We only want two challenges, to be fair. Jose or Joe, do you have any specific challenges for 2022 that you foresee?
There are so many challenges. I think, to me, the Rural Coworking Project, the European Rural Coworking Project, becoming a network of networks and a network of rural coworking spaces is the challenge. I honestly believe that together we can do better, but bringing the people together isn't easy, because we need to identify and learn which are their needs and which are their interests and how to communicate. Europe is full of languages, and there are many barriers to go through. But anyway, I'm extremely enthusiastic about what is yet to come. I'm hearing more and more about rural coworking. I'm hearing more and more ideas of how to use a rural coworking space. Yesterday, I heard a group of elders telling that they want to use coworking spaces to discuss their topics, right? So it is not anymore the coworking space as a place where you're going to do your job or sell your products or design your logo. It is more than it's a place where to connect with people. So yeah, that would be my challenge.
Well, my take would be to sort of make rural co-working more visible, also through the power of the networks. And yeah, maybe also to really reimagine the way we live in small towns and villages, reinventing the new village center and how that could look like. Where we incorporate different services, third spaces, co-working, and really think in new ways how to make it more attractive to live in the countryside, as so many of us now have turned to the countryside. Many have left the cities, and to really use that push factor for an increase in rural activities on all dimensions. And then on another note, and on the research side, I see the challenge really in measuring the impact of co-working. One, in the way, especially for employees who use it within their company. So what effects does it have? But also measuring the impact on co-working, for the rural areas or the peripheral areas where it's situated. And my personal challenge is also related to the construction site, as we are still in the process of rebuilding our not so little brewery, and lots of wood is involved. So that has been a problem, and that's a challenge.
I think how you speak about the that challenge of impact and data and research, I think that's one that's been in existence within co-working for a long time. It evolves in terms of what that looks like and what specific research challenge we have, but it's definitely the thing that is there. Sometimes feels like the key to unlock so much when we have that information that we can say, this is what it's doing and this is how it can benefit communities and this is the impact we have. But getting that key seems to be very hard to bring together when we look at it across the whole of Europe and internationally. There's just a couple of comments that I wanted to just bring people's attention to from Laura. We're an aggregator in the UK. An aggregator platform in the UK, Tally Market. So if I can help anyone with data for funding on searches, etc., for certain areas, feel free to pop me an email. Very useful. And also, Jose's just dropped in, if you would like to join our European rural co-working community, then you can send him a message, as that's probably a very key one. A lot of the people here. Thanks. Address pain points of personal hygiene networks, diverse use of space, measure impact, great list. Yeah, there's a lot to cover there. So we do just have only 3 minutes left, which leaves me definitely 3 minutes to say, I don't know if there are any final comments from any of our panelists that you feel, actually, before everyone goes, they must hear this sentence, otherwise, it would have been pointless them being here. Anything?
I think we probably have to just say something on sustainability. So I know you mentioned sustainable in the context of financial sustainability earlier, but in terms of climate change and we're based in rural areas, that means we're probably close to nature. And there's a fantastic opportunity there, whether it's directly using the space around your site that an urban space might not have to do something useful for the environment, or whether it's just getting more people out into nature and increasing education about the natural world and the beautiful countryside that is outside of cities. And I think there's some really easy things to do there, but also some quite innovative, really interesting projects that you can work on just by virtue of being based in the countryside. So that's something that I don't know if it's a challenge, but it's definitely a more interesting part of our project that we're getting involved with.
That's Rich, a great one. Sorry, go for it, Jose. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, Rich, I was thinking that should be the source of our metric for social impact, what you just said.
Okay, we're thinking on the same lines. Literally, I was like, it's the easiest kind of source and the most, easiest to measure, but also most relevant. And something that I know that inner city co-working spaces, strive to do that, but it's a much more challenging thing for them to achieve when they're in the midst of, a bigger city. So it feels like a free pass in a way. And maybe that's why it's so simple that it feels like it's too obvious to do, but could definitely have that impact. If you're looking to show that to a government or a council, that could be it. So yeah, that was definitely the thing. Well done, Rich. You came up with a thing that you should have come to this for in the final moments. So I just want to say a huge, huge thank you to everyone for joining us, to all of our panelists, to my co-host Naima. We'll be back next month with another fun-filled topic for you. And hopefully we've answered some questions and given you food for thought today. But enjoy the rest of your Thursday and we will see you next time.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.